Hey everyone, today I'm sitting down with Gaidar Magdanurov to talk about the future of cybersecurity and data protection. Gaidar is the president of Acronis, a top-rated leader in cloud security and data loss prevention. I want to ask him about the state of data protection right now, where he sees the space going, and how Acronis fits in the mix. Let's jump in. I'd love to hear your take on the state of cybersecurity in 2025. What do organizations, whether they're end organizations, whether they're, service providers, what do we need to know across, prevention, detection, response and recovery, and kind of what's most important today?
From what we see, there are a few things happening in the cybersecurity market. So, of course, using AI is critical now. So it's implemented everywhere, just because the attackers started to use AI and attacks became more sophisticated and also at a large scale. So that just means that we have to step up our game in cybersecurity. And the key thing that we see happening is that there's just not enough people to manage cybersecurity. Corporations, MSPs, and MSPs actually even worse than corporate IT, they just don't have enough people with the experience. So that means that we have more threats. They are happening, attacks are happening all the time and happening at scale, and we don't have enough people to mitigate them. So what we see happening is the consolidation. We see that lots of tools that are used in cybersecurity are being integrated, and people going towards the integrated platforms because it is easier to manage when you have everything integrated. It is harder to make a mistake, and there are fewer chances that one of the components of the overall cybersecurity posture will be malfunctioning or misconfigured or have conflicts with other pieces of the overall cybersecurity suite. So that is probably the largest trend that we see, and it is accelerating in 2025. And we expect that it will be accelerating moving forward as well.
So I'm curious on your position on that, Gaidar, on this kind of like integration of security platforms, because, this is something that I've talked to our own cybersecurity analysts about, as a trend. And I try and get a straight answer out of them about, like, is it a good thing to consolidate? Should you, is it a matter of putting all your eggs in one basket? Or, should we look at more of a blend, more point solutions, more fit for purpose? It sounds like you have a bit of a strong take on that, but I wanted to hear, your perspective and why.
Yeah, so let me tell you the long story. When I
Sure.
was learning cybersecurity back in the days when I used to work for Microsoft, it was all about layered defense and having multiple tools, multiple vendors. So in case one tool is compromised, you have other defense layers. And that makes sense. But think about a specific environment where we are. So not enough security expertise, extremely diverse and complicated IT infrastructure that's growing fast. So having multiple tools becomes more and more complicated. And for corporate IT, they may have a dedicated security department, and they will still have some issues. But if we think about smaller organizations or for managed service providers, they just have too many different customers with too many different types of environments. And imagine deploying multiple agents and maintaining those multiple agents in those environments. It is just extremely complicated. And we're all human. We all make mistakes. So imagine I have to support multiple tools, and I have to update them, maintain licenses, maintain configuration, update them from time to time. So eventually I will make a mistake, and that will lead to a breach of my cybersecurity environment. So the thing is, the world has changed and the pace is much faster. And the risks of having, as you mentioned, all the eggs in one basket are kind of giving in towards the risk of compromised IT security due to misconfiguration, update failures,
Right.
and stuff like that. So if you think about it, now it is easier and more reliable to have an integrated solution. And here I'll add one more thing. Integrated cybersecurity solution has to have ways to remediate. So it is not only detection and response, but it's also recovery. And in most cases, also in forensics. Because if you think about it, incidents will happen. No matter what kind of cybersecurity you have, eventually somebody will find a way to breach that security. And you need a way to get back to business. And what we see happening is that more and more businesses are implementing disaster recovery as a way to do the remediation. So in the past, most companies would have a backup. And if in case something happens, they can use that backup to recover. But usually it takes time. And also it requires spare hardware or uh, refreshing the existing hardware that was being compromised. So it was significant time gap between you get back to business and the actual attack. So what we see happening now is that disaster recovery, a kind of an active copy that can be just spin up in the cloud and
Mhm.
get you back to business, becomes more of a standard. So in many industries, the downtime is extremely expensive. So what people do now is for critical servers and applications, they implement disaster recovery. So that becomes part of overall security posture. And the good thing here is that no matter what happens, and if your system is breached, you can go back to business, to the productive state.
If you work in IT, Infotech Research Group is a name you need to know. No matter what your needs are, Infotech has you covered. AI strategy? Covered. Disaster recovery? Covered. Vendor negotiation? Covered. Infotech supports you with the best practice research and a team of analysts standing by, ready to help you tackle your toughest challenges. Check it out at the link below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I love that, and it makes complete sense, and it's aligned with everything. I've read and I've heard recently about, like, it feels like it's less. The emphasis now is less on the prevention side because no organization is unbreachable. It's how we can make sure we can get back to business. How does ransomware come into play with all of this? Is that a separate beast? Do we have tools now that can help us, recover even in the face of these like ransomware attacks where they try and hold our data hostage? What's your position there?
So ransomware is still a problem. It's probably the largest cybersecurity threat by far.
Mm.
And the reason being here is that you don't have to create new types of ransomware or malware to execute the attacks. You just need to find ways to deploy it. And AI helps here a lot because what we see from our research, and we have our threat research unit, is that 80 to 90% of all attacks are happening through email. So in the past, making those phishing emails was a bit complicated. And now what's happening is that with AI, you can scan the public profile of a person and create a really tailored email that will attack that particular person. So the success rate of those phishing attacks is becoming higher. And we also see an interesting thing is that we all get used to phishing emails. Like I'm getting them all the time, despite all the filters, and they look kind of sloppy. So you can clearly see,
Yeah.
oh, it's phishing email. It is actually a tactic that people use to attack you. So they will send you hundreds of sloppy made emails, and they look crappy, right? And
Yeah.
you clearly see that is a phishing email. And then they'll send you one email that will be just perfect. That
Wow.
would be just perfect. And your brain is already trained to detect those kind of sloppy emails. And then you see this perfect email. You don't believe it as a phishing email. And you just click
Right.
on it, provide your credentials, and that's it. So because of that, there are more ransomware attacks happening. And what we see happening on the market is that there are more and more companies implementing XDR or extended detection response solutions that is connecting endpoint protection with the email protection or collaboration app protection for, let's say, M365. So in case somebody in the organization receives that email and fill in the login and password or download something, the solution could detect that there's an attack on the endpoint and then understand which account was compromised. So that account will be blocked automatically. And then the copies of that email would be deleted automatically from the email of the other users in the organization. And that is a way to kind of quickly stop those type of attacks. And then the other thing related to ransomware that is kind of interesting is that there are quite a few ways to deploy ransomware that are using vulnerabilities in the system. So every system have vulnerabilities, and from time to time we have all the patches and updates. And what happens that when attackers discover a vulnerability that allows to deploy malicious code, they can use it to do the attack through the network. And what happens is that you get attacked, you recover from your backup, but you recover the previous state of the system that has that
Right.
vulnerability, and you get infected again. And it just
Mm.
happens over and over again. And the usual ways to do to remediate those type of attacks is to take the system offline, recover, patch it, and investigate what happened, and then bring it back. And it takes time. That is why what we also see, and that's what we have in our solution Acronis, is patching and recovery. It actually becomes extremely important in those cases where vulnerability is exploited. And just just the way it is exploited now is that somebody discovers it and publishes it on dark web, and then it's available to everybody. And they sell vulnerabilities
Yeah.
now, and the speed of attack is just increasing. So vulnerability is discovered, and lots of people start to exploit it right away, up until the patch is released. So this whole idea of kind of being able to recover and being able to patch on recovery becomes extremely, extremely important.
And on that note, are you finding like are tools enabling organizations to have a better response posture here that's helping them, negotiate more strongly with, the those who are executing ransomware attacks? Because my sense is for a very long time we've been in this situation where the playbook for ransomware is you swear up and down you're not going to pay the ransom, and then you like hold your nose and
Yeah.
pay the ransom. Are we moving toward a world where we can get away from that and we can actually either pay a smaller ransom, we can get back up faster? What do tools allow us to do today?
So if you think about it, if you have a regular backup in place and you get ransomed, you can recover. You
Mhm.
will lose some data depending on the backup
Right.
window, but it is kind of the first step. And what we see happening is large organizations, they have backup disaster recovery deployed, but smaller organizations, especially small, medium businesses, they don't
Uh-huh.
believe that they'll be attacked. They think that nobody cares about them. But I'll give you a great example. We have one partner in Greece, relatively small country. It's one of the MSSPs there, relatively small.
Mhm.
Within less than 2 years, they had more than 1,100 ransomware negotiations on behalf of SMBs. So if you
Wow.
think about it, just one partner doing more than one negotiation a day. And the reason for that is that attackers already understood that attacking enterprise, it's it's a great reward that you can get if you'll be able to really disrupt their business. But it's much harder because they may have backup, they have security remediation plans. But then smaller businesses usually don't have anything in place or have something very basic. And if they are ransomed, they'll just go out of business. And the ransomware payments actually surprisingly small because they can do it at scale. So I believe their average ransom is under $2,000 now for the
Uh,
SMB, because the attackers can execute those attacks at huge scale. Again, thanks to AI, they can
right.
do the phishing, they can deploy malware, and they can ransom thousands of businesses, and then they can just collect money from it. But the important consideration here is that paying ransom is not working all the time. It
Right.
actually, and I'm not sure what's the current statistics, but we've seen that about 30% cases, the attackers cannot help you. You pay them, but they cannot decrypt the data for
Ha.
various reasons. Or maybe they don't want to do that, or maybe they never plan to do that. So it is actually becomes a vicious circle. So you're attacked, you pay, they make money, but that just incentivizes them to continue doing that.
Right.
So one way to fight those ransomware attacks is stop paying them. It's to stop paying them, we need to deploy the solution that will allow to recover. And here we just need backup and disaster recovery.
Yeah. So you mentioned MSPs, and I'm curious, Gaidar, like in the landscape of cybersecurity breaches, of attacks, we've had a position for a while that vendors, whether it's vendors or MSPs, they can actually, for a lot of end organizations, be a weak link in your defense. what do MSPs need to know about this, and what do end IT organizations need to know as they procure and work with MSPs?
There are many things, but I would start with one, maybe most critical one: supply chain attacks. It is a thing. It's a huge thing. So in many cases, attackers, they try to penetrate a large enterprise through one of the vendors. So you may be a small business that is delivering some services to the large enterprise, and you have access to some systems. So they will attack you to get to the enterprise. And
Right.
the thing is, most of those attacks may not be even discovered on the SMB side or the smaller vendor side, because they are just a bridge between the attacker and the enterprise. And MSPs becoming, actually, they became a target quite some time ago, but the number of attacks of MSPs growing, because if an MSP has access to hundreds of customers, then penetrating their network, they will have access to those customers, and then through those customers, they can go after their targets. Usually, more sophisticated cyber criminals are doing that. Uh, but again, what we see due to AI, it becomes easier for almost everybody to do it. And we're doing a lot of experiments all the time. Now, it's not only the phishing emails that you can create with AI. You can write code with AI. You can basically use AI to generate malware or exploits for known vulnerabilities. It expands the number of people that are capable to execute those attacks. So you don't have to be a smart software engineer um, to do the malware attack. You can be basically somebody just following step-by-step guide that you just downloaded on dark web. And that's what's scary, because if we think about the MSP space, it's from 200 to 300,000 companies worldwide that either provide or offer resell managed services. And quite a lot of them, they're relatively small, they serve a small number of customers, and they provide very basic level of protection and very basic tools to protect their customers. So those MSPs are being attacked. And when those MSPs are being attacked successfully, they go out of business and their customers go
Mm.
out of business. And sometimes customers of their customers go out of business. So it is scary when you think about it. And in case of MSPs, as we were talking in the very beginning, they do need tools that are really easy to use and that are integrated. Because one technician MSP can be handling multiple customers with very diverse infrastructure. So they just need one simple tool that would be like a single agent that they can deploy in the infrastructure, a single console, single policy to configure it. Otherwise, they either make mistakes, or something will be misconfigured, or some update will fail. It will create a whole disaster for them. So I would say this trend to the consolidation of cybersecurity is happening everywhere, but it is especially important for the MSP.
It makes complete sense. And as you said, it's really cool now that the tools are at a place where, with this shortage of staff, of resources who can do this, hiring more doesn't sound like it's the answer in this space, right? It's how can we find tools that are going to actually enable us. So what do, on the end IT organization side, for IT organizations that are working with MSPs, what questions should they be asking their MSPs to make sure that they're buttoned down and they're not going to create vulnerabilities for the end organizations?
So there may be a whole checklist of what you can ask, but you can start from the tools that they use, the procedures that they have in place. So what's the plan in case of an attack or in case of a breach? So what is important to understand is what's the protocol in case something is discovered, and how they're going to follow up on that, or how they're going to remediate. What is the expected time or SLA on recovery? Depending on type of a business, the downtime can be critical. It could be extremely expensive, and attackers know about it, so they know when to attack the business when it's the most vulnerable. So they're willing to pay more. So let's say if you legal firm and in the middle of litigation, you cannot access your database of documents, it is a problem. And
Yeah.
the thing is, uh, here you really want to know what is the time that will take the MSP to react, and what is the time that they can guarantee that you'll get back to business. So I think that's the very, very basic things where you should start talking to the MSP about cybersecurity. But then I wanted to highlight another thing. It is extremely important for MSPs or corporate IT to provide cybersecurity training. You have to provide at least very basic awareness training to the people, because the user will be the weakest link in the security
Right.
posture anyway. So if you don't do that, or you just do it as a checkbox activity, it is actually a terrible thing to do, because you think, okay, everybody went through a training or did something, so they kind of prepared, but in reality, they just click through the training and that's it. So you have to think about how you train people and how you check that they were trained. So good example would be running some kind of phishing simulation, just to understand who's actually clicking on those links, and then identify those people and actually talk to them or implement some additional training for them. But then the other thing is to train people on the procedures. So what happens if you discover that something is going wrong? So your computer is being attacked, or you see that your files are encrypted. So what are the next steps? Instead of panicking, like you have to follow a
Mhm.
specific procedure, that may potentially reduce the damage. And a lot of MSPs just starting to think about it. And for good or for bad, cyber insurance companies are pushing it, and a lot of compliance regulations are pushing it. So you have to do some kind of a security awareness training, and that's becoming a thing. And more MSPs have to provide that. And I would expect that it will have some impact on improving the security posture of the organizations.
What what role do you see the training playing versus like the tools that help us actually detect these attacks? And the reason I ask is, in my sense, and maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but in my sense, a few years ago, I was hearing like it's all about cybersecurity training. That's the big thing. We need to make sure we're training our end users. And what I've been hearing more about these days is these kind of automated tools for detection, or for, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, like
Yeah.
cutting off some of these patterns as they're happening. Are organizations starting to give up on the notion that security awareness training is good enough, or is it always and?
It is always and, because it's like trust but verify, right?
Mhm.
You train people, but you kind of expect that something will happen anyway. So you
Right.
need the tools in place, but tools are not the solution. It is piece of the solution, because if you think about it, and a successful cyber attack could be just your account is compromised, they stole your credentials and they log in on your behalf, and they're not doing any damage to the system. They're just stealing data or collecting intelligence. Because if you think about it, data is new oil, right? It's something that everybody needs. It's a source of energy. If I am able to collect private data through your organization about your employees, customers, vendors, partners, I can use that to attack those organizations. And that's a real issue. And that's what most people don't really understand fully, is that anything you make public on the internet can be used against you. But everything that you have as a private information exchange with any other third party can be used against you as well, because that third party can be hacked, the data will
Mhm.
be stolen, and it will be used against you. And it can be exploited in many different ways. I personally had experience where I was traveling to Switzerland, and I got a call in the middle of the night from the phone number that looked like my cell phone provider, and they had all my information. All they
Mm.
wanted to know, I actually don't remember what they wanted to know, but like some numbers, and I was like, "Oh, okay. They know everything about me. Maybe they're legit." But something was a bit suspicious. Like, why would they call me? Like I don't know. So I stopped the call and call the hotline for the cell phone provider, and they told me, no, we're not doing that.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
that was basically it was one of the breaches, like major breaches that happened. So they had my address, my previous employment, my previous address, my social security number. Like, imagine the vast amount of information they were able to collect just from breaching one of the credit report bureaus in the US. So It is happening all the time. So basically, any information you shared with anybody can potentially be stolen, exploited against you.
Right.
That's kind of a scary thing.
It's a super scary thing. It's scary for individuals. It's scary for organizations. You mentioned you mentioned a story in passing about, MSPs. An organization can be brought down by a breach, and then their customers can be brought down, and in a worst case scenario, their customers' customers could be brought down. Uh, you know, have you seen? Can you share maybe some of the examples you've seen of like what does this look like in a worst case scenario, and what does this look like for organizations that are actually prepared?
Yeah, I cannot name names apparently,
Of
but I
course.
can give you some patterns of what happened. So the very basic attack that happens is that an employee in MSP receives an email on behalf of a customer requesting some information or requesting some access, like or changing passwords. And then the MSP executes the request, and then somebody gets the admin password or any kind
Wow.
of super user password for the infrastructure. That's one of the ways that attackers do that. So they don't need any tools, anything. They just trick the help desk person to provide the information. They may hack into the email system and send an email from the actual customer, and that way it's very hard to detect what's going on. So imagine somebody's asking you to reset the password, you reset the password goes on the email is hacked, so they actually have the access to it. That's one of the popular scenarios. The other popular scenario is that if there's a way to access the system of an MSP, of MSP technician, the attackers will log into that system, and then they use the remote management tool that MSP use to deploy malware. So it's kind of it'll go through the same approach of like deploying software patches. They will just try to do that. It's rare now, so I would say most of the attacks are still kind of a social engineering phishing,
Mm.
trying to reset passwords and trying to collect some information. We've seen some breaches where the infrastructure of an MSP will be compromised, and the attackers will get admin level access to the infrastructure of the end customer. And then it leads to all sorts of problems, to ransomware. And actually, what attackers usually do when they get admin access to the MSP, they would remove backups.
Mm.
Backups, disable disaster recovery. They will just make sure that
Wow.
there's it's very difficult to recover,
They
and
make it
then
as
they will be
painful as
able to.
possible.
Yeah, yeah. Most of the kind of more advanced malware packages, they would try to disable backup or corrupt the backup. That
Mm.
is why for any kind of a security solution, an integrated solution, it's important to protect the backup as well. Make sure that it is immutable and nobody can actually modify it. So this type of attacks are kind of popular. One interesting aspect of an attack is that more and more of attackers, they know that they don't want to get discovered right away because the benefit of doing the attack is not as huge. So what they do, they would deploy malware that will just stay in a system for multiple months. And if you think about it, if it goes there undiscovered, it actually gets into the backups. It's everywhere, and then over time they can start exploiting it. And even when the attack is discovered and remediation executed, they can bring the malware back. So all those things are actually happening. And um, if I were to talk to our threat research unit team, they've seen everything you can imagine, and everything that you cannot imagine, it actually happening somewhere in the world.
So what is that? What is that? You mentioned the exploitation and like the long-term effects of malware. What does that look like? Can you paint a bit of a picture of just,
It,
how
it
bad
de-
this can
yeah,
get, or what happens when organizations are compromised like that?
yeah, it depends on the objective of an attacker. There are probably two major scenarios. One is stealing the data, and one is doing something like a ransomware attack or disrupting the business. So in case of stealing the data, I had a great example just recently. We discovered in one of the backups of one of our customers, and the customer is a company in Taiwan that is producing military drones. We discovered some suspicious software, and without going deep into technical details, that software is actually exploiting an older version of Microsoft Office, and they basically would deploy this older version to execute that attack. And the whole goal of that software was just to steal the data. They would just steal the
Wow.
data, and they wouldn't do any damage. So when our team discovered it, we did some research, we understood what's going on. And this is a type of attack that is executed on manufacturers, on financial organizations, on law firms. And the whole goal is to be able to steal this information that can be sold or
Right.
reused. So on the dark web, there are lots of wonderful people that are reselling information. Yeah, so that's one kind of vector of attack for this malware, like persistent malware. And the other one is just basically sitting on a system up until it is time to do encryption or some disruption. So usually attackers will deploy that malware and then just wait for the moment when you're the most
Mm,
vulnerable.
right.
Imagine you are doing like a broadcast, a Super Bowl, and you're in charge of it, and then your infrastructure is encrypted.
Right.
Chances that you will pay if you want to get back to business. And that's what attackers are doing. So they deploy the malware, they wait, and then they execute it.
Right. When can they unleash the absolute most damage, or maximize the dollar value they're going to get out of this?
Yeah, like example for SMBs, we see there are more attacks during holidays, especially on like retail stores or any kind of companies that doing like e-commerce, because that's when they make the most of money. And
Right.
that's when they're being encrypted, and that's when they're willing to pay quickly. And I had multiple conversations with MSP partners and with the end customers that they don't like to admit that something like that happened. So when our partners, MSPs, going to SMBs, pitching them security, they may not know that customers experienced issues in the past, but then over time they'll discover it. And the thing is, like those type of attacks, and especially on small businesses and e-commerce businesses, they'd be like super quick. So they deployed malware, did some ransomware, and then they take a ransom of like $300 and recovered them. But then what I learned, and it's not surprising, but I was still surprised, is that multiple businesses are being attacked multiple times. So they got hit, they paid, and then they operate, and they believe nothing else will happen. They hit again, they pay again, and they hit again. And then after that, they go to a MSP or MSSP, managed security service provider, to implement a better security posture.
Right.
So yeah.
And the insight for me here is I didn't really know this as well, but none of this is random, right? It's not, oh, they happen to get this, or they happen to pick this day or this amount. It's all being perfectly tailored to figure out when are they going to do the most damage, what's the most they think they can get you to pay. Is that fair?
For the smart guys, yes. So
Hmm.
attacks are becoming more sophisticated. They're basically trying to maximize the profit. But at the
Right.
same time, there are lots of, I would call them new entrants
Mm.
to this market. Basically, it can be just school kids just
Yeah.
downloading some malware package and deploying it. Because there are like ransomware builders. It's a software that creates malware to do the ransomware attacks. And there are ransomware as a service. Basically, somebody build malware and they give it to you. You deploy it and you
Whoa.
get percentage of the ransom that they will collect. And some ransomware gangs are just incredible. They have call centers. They help you to buy Bitcoin or whatever coin to transfer that. It is business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business,
Yeah.
and that it is in every industry. There are like basic players and there are very advanced players. So it can be random, especially for those types of attacks where somebody just sends out like an email to millions and millions of email addresses that they just purchased on dark web, and then small percentage of those people will click on it, and percentage of those people who clicked will get to the state when they'll download the malware, and then the data will be encrypted. But then they will collect some ransom, and they will do over and over again the same type of attack. And the thing is, I would say, media is to blame for that, because the small stories of small attacks are not interesting. So you don't
Right.
see in the news, oh, 10,000 businesses were attacked, each paid $100. Nobody cares about it. And that's why people are not aware and they don't believe that will happen to them. They read about multi-million-dollar attacks or state-backed attackers stealing Bitcoin or Ethereum from a crypto exchange. They hear about that. They think, oh, we're too small to be attacked. And then they are being attacked. And I would say for MSPs, it is still kind of hard to sell cybersecurity to smaller businesses, because up until the moment they experience an attack, they kind of believe it will not happen to them. Many experience an attack and they think it will not happen again because they became smarter. So it is complicated. In case of remediation and selling backup and disaster recovery, it's slightly easier, especially with disaster recovery. The sales process is extremely simple. Like, you show up and say, okay, how much an hour of downtime costs to you? $1,000. Okay, how many hours of downtime you have due to unforeseen circumstances? I don't know, 4 hours. Okay, so you basically telling me that you lose $4,000 a month just because of downtime. I'll deploy disaster recovery and you'll get 1 hour of downtime. So you'll save $3,000, right? So when they talk like that to the business owners, it's relatively easy sell.
Right.
But when they talk about cybersecurity, it's like, if you hit, you go out of business, or so you'll have to pay a lot. So it's a major, major loss. But the chances of it are not unknown.
It's a boogeyman to them, right? Like, it's telling them a ghost story.
Exactly. Right? And the thing is, up until you see that it's happening to somebody around you, you just don't have this psychological confirmation bias. When you see that, oh, it's happening to this guy, it may happen to me. You see something else. You see that it's happening to big guys. It's never happening to the small guys. So that is an issue. And actually, an interesting part of it is that in corporate world, it's kind of the same. When you think about corporate IT in large enterprise working with their users, the users believe that somebody thought about their cyber defense. So they kind of relax. Like, it's corporate IT, they're doing something. And that leads to issues because people just don't believe they'll be attacked, and they're getting attacked and then getting encrypted, or business becoming disrupted. There's an interesting kind of statistics that I read recently, is that there's more so-called edge computing happening in the enterprises. So the processing of data is moving out of the data center to the edge, to the remote offices, to department level. So it's outside of the data center. And last year it was 40%. This year is 65% of compute and data processing is moving to the edge. That means that the enterprise IT or the corporate IT department, they don't have as much control over what's happening in the remote offices.
Right.
And the enterprises are being breached through the endpoints in those remote offices. And then when you think about remote work, that is still a thing everywhere, almost everywhere, it becomes even worse, because quite often people may be accessing their corporate networks from the home networks, and the home network can be compromised easier than the corporate network. A lot of companies implement the policy that users can use the home device. And if I just connect from my home laptop that is used by my family, and I don't know, my kid might have downloaded a malware, so the attackers have access to my home computer and they can see what's happening on my screen, for example. There are many attacks like that. So it is easier to attack a home user, and then through that home user penetrate the corporate network.
Right. So on the flip side of all of this, for the organizations that have the right tools, for the organizations that are prepared, how happy is the happy path, right? We've established that you can't prevent all attacks. There's still some risk, there's still some issues, but what does it look like when we actually are prepared and have the right tools in place?
So first of all, you have the right tools deployed, and usually it is the complete package that covers all stages of protection. So you start with prevention. And prevention usually implemented by some form of remote management and monitoring solution where you do vulnerability assessment, so you scan for issues. You do patch management, so you make sure that you have the most recent patches deployed. You do monitoring to understand what's going on in the system. So you do prevention. That's the kind of the
Right.
first step. Then the second step, you need something for detection that something is going on in the system, usually some form of EDR or XDR solution. And then you need something for kind of response, the blocking the attacks, blocking the accounts, preventing malware from spreading, maybe disconnecting some segments of the network with just an endpoint that was compromised. Then you have a solution or part of that solution that is doing recovery. So in case something goes wrong, you can go back and restore. And then, and a lot of companies kind of miss that, there's important fifth stage is the forensic. After attack is remediated, you want to know what happened. You want to know how did they get to your system, or what was done on the system, or what was stolen. And quite often you can do that if you have the backup copy that you can use to investigate the state of your data before the attack and after the attack. And the thing is, and I urge a lot of companies to think about it, at least as part of the remediation plan, to think about how they're going to investigate. Because if the network or the device was compromised once, there's a chance it will be compromised again if the preventative measures are not implemented. So that's what I'm kind of envisioning as a complete protection when you have this prevention, detection, response, recovery, and forensic. And all those steps are covered by your cybersecurity solution. And then it can be multiple tools, but multiple tools are prone to human errors, configuration errors, bunch of different issues, compatibility issues, issues with updates, or it can be in one integrated solution. In our case, and that was our vision from the very beginning when we entered the cybersecurity market back in like 2014, when we hired the whole cybersecurity team to build that solution. The vision was that for the environments of the MSPs and for the corporate IT edge scenarios, the integrated solution is much better and more reliable than not an integrated solution. And one last thing I would mention here, it is integration can be really different. So in our case, from the very beginning, we wanted to do what we call native integration. It's like one agent, one console, one policy. And that's the part of our vision that is able to provide this complete cybersecurity. While a lot of other vendors, what they do integrate multiple tools. So they use APIs. They still have multiple agents, multiple consoles. They all work together. They provide better visibility and better productivity, but they don't provide the same level of reliability. And that's kind of confusing a lot of people, because when you go and read about cybersecurity solutions from different vendors, you'll see that everybody's talking about integration. But at the same time, it's very, very much different from vendor to vendor how things are actually integrated.
So what are when it comes to Acronis then, Gaidar, what are the biggest reasons that, your customers choose Acronis versus any other solution out there?
Definitely, I would say, okay, there's only one reason they choose it. I would say it's native integration, one agent,
Okay.
one console, one policy. So it's easy to use, easy to deploy, it's easy to onboard people. But when I think about it a little bit more, I would say it's also the user experience in general. Because I used to be an IT guy and used to be software engineer, and I can compare different solutions, and I know how important the user interface is. So if it's complicated, there'll be issues. So it should be as easy as possible. But then the other thing is that we are not only providing a tool that's complete cybersecurity, we provide a whole platform that can be used to integrate other tools. And we have, I think, 283 different integrations already, and they keep coming in.
Right.
Different vendors integrate with us. So it is not only the tool for protection, but also the complete platform for MSP or corporate IT if they serve as a service provider to the whole organization, because they can take the tools that they have and integrate or use the existing integration. And what we see quite often is that our partners, they have some tools that they develop themselves, and they integrate those tools with our platform. So they have one complete solution, and they have visibility in what's going on with our tools, their tools, and that allows them to build their own protection stack.
Right.
So that's why people choose Acronis.
So it's a one-stop shop, but what that shop looks like is different for each organization because of those integration pieces.
Yeah, there's a lot of customization
Hmm.
happening because it's impossible to protect everything and provide all
Yeah.
possible tools because there are some interesting scenarios. But I would say for most of the MSPs, the main challenge now is productivity. They don't have enough people to support the demand from the end customers. We see that the IT infrastructure is growing. By the end of 2030, it will double from what we have now. It means that there's double the amount of endpoints to manage
Yeah.
and protect for the MSPs. But at the same time, there's a huge gap in millions of people, of IT professionals that we just cannot hire because they're not existent. And it will not be possible to close that gap in those 5 years. And what we see happening is that there's more workload coming towards the MSPs. And the thing for them, if they're able to be more productive, they can acquire more customers and grow the business. But if they cannot be more productive, they will not be able to fulfill the demand and will not be competitive. That's why an integrated platform for an MSP, it is becoming not only a nice to have thing, it's a crucial thing. If you
Right.
don't integrate now, if you don't increase your productivity now, you'll miss the opportunity.
Right. They have no choice other than to get more effective tools if they want to be able to meet this growing demand.
Yeah, integration automation. That's the future. I have the phrase that I used to use in all the MSP events for the last 10 years: automate or die. Because
Yeah.
if you don't automate,
Yeah.
you will not be able to keep up. But automation also requires the integrated platform because otherwise, what are you going to automate? So yeah, that's the important thing. And for corporate IT, it is kind of the same
Hmm.
because corporate IT in many organizations become internal service provider. They do the same things as an MSP does.
Sure.
In many cases, large enterprises, they also outsource some of their IT needs to MSPs. So corporate IT would deal with line of business applications and the data center, but everything on the edge, like managing all the endpoints, printers, network shares, whatever, will be with the MSP, or cloud services maybe with the MSP. So the large enterprises is outsourcing more and more towards the MSP. And that's another opportunity. And not to miss that, MSPs need the productivity so they can support more customers, more workload with the same team that they have now.
Got it. I'm curious, Gaidar, I wanted to ask you, is there any conventional wisdom in cybersecurity right now that you think is absolutely wrong, or any technologies you see being hyped or solutions you see being hyped where you're like, that's not the answer. That's not going to help people. We need a different approach.
Oh, there are so many. I probably would call out the AI. So a lot of vendors, they tend to say, okay, we implemented AI, and people, especially without deep cybersecurity expertise, they think, okay, AI will do some magic and it will just defend
Hmm.
us. In reality, no. And there are two things I would highlight here. So first, just kind of having AI inside of your system, it's not always enough because AI is working out of data, and there are attacks where you compromise data. And the thing is, instead of trying to attack your security solution, you can just modify the input so that solution will be rendered
Huh.
useless. So those type of attacks are happening. So AI is not always, and in most cases, not a solution by itself. It has to be implemented in the correct way. But then the second thing with AI, no matter how much you invest in AI tools, at some point there will be people that will
Yeah.
be somehow interacting with that AI. And what I see is important is that you have to use AI wisely to train those people. So I'll give you an example of what we've done with Acronis. We we have AI implemented for a long time, or initially we called machine learning, but it's
Mhm.
basically the same thing, for behavioral analysis and detection. We use it in our EDR solution, so we can dynamically detect all type of attacks and threats. But we also implemented the support for LLM that would generate human readable description of an attack. So it's not only the raw data and the graph that is useful for experts, but it is also a description that can be used by anybody who has some basic IT knowledge to understand what is going on and how you're going to remediate that. And part of our investment here is not only just to help people to remediate the attack, but also learn. So with every new attack, with every new incident that I handle, I get more and more information about what type of attacks can happen. What do I do in those cases? So in the process, we train people. And that, I believe, is extremely important for cybersecurity, that it's not only about the tools, but it's also about the people. And when we talk about people, it's about education. We need
Right.
to train them how to handle those cybersecurity incidents.
I love that. I love that. That's, yeah, very, very well said, and I think makes the case for why the education piece is, more important than ever. For anyone who's maybe listening to this and interested in getting in touch with Acronis or getting in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, it's easy to find me if you search for Gaidar Acronis. You can probably find me on social media, but also you can just drop me an email. It's gm@acronis.com, and I'm happy to answer to any questions.
Amazing. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks so much for sharing the message, and really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.